Ladies and gentlemen, look at this gorgeous recipe. This is my version of Salisbury steak. And we're going to take a simple, humble dish, elevate it to a gourmet level so that it's something very, very special. Today I'm going to be making a recipe called Salisbury steak. This isn't your typical Salisbury steak, folks, as you've seen from the thumbnail. I'm going to take this recipe, we're going to elevate it to something very, very special. We're going to take a simple, common, everyday kind of dish, a common man's dish, and we're going to take it and elevate it to a gourmet special dish. Something that really stands out, something that has flavor like you've never tasted in a Salisbury steak. It's going to be beefier and, well, all the way around it's going to be better. Now, so you'll know, let's get into the history of this for just a moment. Now, this is my tutorial, of course, so this is where I really kind of get into depth on where a recipe comes from. What's the history on it? First of all, the recipe is written, or I should say, the recipe is named after a doctor named James Henry Salisbury. J.H. Salisbury wrote a book that he published in 1888, and that book was The Relation of Alimentation and Disease. I've read part of this book, not all of it. And what I have learned from this is that he was writing about how food relates to health, and how if the diet is proper, people don't suffer from diabetes and all these other problems that you commonly see. So a lot of disease problems, he believed, were remedied through proper diet. Through eating the right way, we keep ourselves healthy. And he was a proponent of a meat protein rich diet and prepared certain types of recipes out of chopped meats. So this is kind of in keeping with his theories. So that's where the recipe of Salisbury steak came from. But the problem I'm seeing these days, and by the way, let me give you some more history on that. The book itself, published 1888, Dr. Salisbury lived from 1823 to 1905. And I'll say this, when I was reading through this thing, the man is more accredited than you can imagine. He was the member of more societies than you can imagine, you know, these clubs and groups. And so he was a brilliant man that was very, very well educated. And his studies on Civil War soldiers was incredible, and that book is incredible. It's very heady reading if you want to get into it. I'm not going to recommend it, but it's there if you want to read it. It's and worth the time. I found it through the Smithsonian. Anyway, wonderful recipe that came from that, which is this beautiful seasoned steak, ground meat steak that was cooked up and served with a lot of gravy, usually some onions and mushrooms, all right? And that was something he was a proponent of, was cooking, you know, a little mushroom, or rather not mushroom, but onion gravy to go with it. The mushrooms, I think, came later on. And a lot of the recipes that I have looked at out there for Salisbury steak, he would not agree with. He would say, no, you don't put breadcrumbs in this recipe. That's what we're trying to eliminate. There's too many grains going on here. They're causing health problems. We need to focus more on this meat. And he would say, no, you don't put the breadcrumbs in there. That's not correct. So in keeping with his thinking, that's what I'm going to do. We're going to take the Salisbury steak and we're going to go from a pan full of ground meat and gravy to a very elevated dish that's going to be a gourmet dish that's going to be the kind of thing that you can serve at a formal occasion if you had to. We're about to really seriously elevate Salisbury steak. And you've seen the picture, that thumbnail. It's a beautiful dish. Folks, let me show you how I do it. This is Salisbury steak, my way. Now this is Salisbury steak, and of course it begins with the steak. I began today by grinding up this sirloin steak, and that was a choice sirloin. As far as how big, well, that will depend on how many people you're feeding. The one I used was about 1.5 pounds, but My portion size I like to keep between about 8 to 14 ounces. 14 ounce would be a big size steak, and an 8 ounce would be a good size, but more in the realm of, you know, regular size steak. Now, when it comes to our other ingredients, down here we have our mushrooms, some shallot, and chives, and that is to make that beautiful sauce with. Also, if you'll notice, I have some wine here. On the wine, I would recommend let's use either a rosé wine or a white Zinfandel. Either is going to work perfect for this dish. Seasonings, keeping it simple, folks. You have some salt and pepper, and also with this, and it's not out here, there's some butter. We'll be using butter in that sauce. And the thing of it is when you see how quickly this is cooked and how delicious it can be, you're going to be rethinking Salisbury steak altogether. Let's examine for just a moment before I get into the meat grinding. What would Dr. Salisbury do? Let's think about this. How were foods prepared in the 1800s? Now, I like studying old recipes. I think it's real kick. And the way old recipes are written is completely different from the way they're written now. You know, in the 1800s, a recipe was written the same way that you would write somebody a letter, and you would describe to them that you prepared a meal and how you made it. And that's pretty much the way they were written. They were just written as a description of, hey, here's what you do. There wasn't a recipe ingredients list and then you know, itemized instructions underneath. They didn't do that. They would just basically talk it out in a letter, and you either could follow that recipe or you couldn't. But I learned a lot of things. The way things were done in the 1800s were a lot different because they didn't have exactly the same ingredients that we have now. Yeah, they would have had that sirloin steak, you better believe it. They would have had onion. Would the shallot have been there? Probably not. It wouldn't have been there unless it was in an upscale manner. Would the chives have been there? Maybe not. Would black pepper and salt have been there? Most likely. That most likely would have been the seasoning. What would they have been frying it in? Probably either tallow or lard. There wasn't canola oil then. Olive oil was too precious and expensive to fry in. Peanut oil didn't exist at that time. You couldn't go and get all vegetable oil. So people fried in common animal fats, and that would have been the two most common would have been either pig fat or cow fat, and that's tallow or lard. Well, so that's what they would have been cooking this in, and they would not have had all the extraneous ingredients in the meat that you see in a lot of recipes. Dr. Salisbury would have freaked out about putting breadcrumbs in there. They wouldn't have had garlic powder to deal with. They may have had fresh garlic, but not garlic powder. Okay, so we have to kind of re-examine this if we want to go back and get a little more accurate in what we're making, but at the same time lift this up to gourmet. So let's grind up the meat and get busy cooking. Come on. Okay, there's our steak, and we're going to get busy cutting that up to put it in the grinder in a moment. If you don't have a grinder, you can use a knife and simply chop it. Make sure that knife is good and sharp. Now, the grinder I'm using is one that fits on the end of my mixer. Very handy item. And something I want to mention about this thing, though. Never stand in front of this, okay? Never point it towards you, because here's the thing. These guys build up a lot of pressure up inside of them because it takes that meat and uses an auger to force it through this end die, which breaks it into its little components of the grind. Well, when that happens, that extra pressure can cause juices or bits of meat to shoot out. And if you're in front of it, you're the one that gets hit. So aim it at something that doesn't matter if it gets hit, and be careful about the nozzle, okay? Now, also, you want to make sure that this ring, if you have one that has a ring on here, is tight enough so you don't get bypassing on the edge, okay? So I've got this ready and set up. I'm going to cut up my meat. We're going to get busy grinding. Here we go. Let's get busy. Now, sometimes the meat separates along certain muscles, you see there. So go ahead and just kind of use that to your advantage. Cut it right where those muscles are. And that way you're not fighting it as much. Now on a sirloin, I want to cut these About 1-inch wide strips to grind them. I find that works well. And yes, I'm keeping all of the fat in there. That adds a lot of flavor. It's quite delicious, all right? This, yeah, I better cut it. Same way here. All right, now this has a long strip of fat, so I'm going to reduce it into some smaller pieces and feed it in there in a different way. I already have this board out that I've cut the meat on, so I'm going to go ahead and grind it right here on this. And then we will form our steak and get busy cooking, okay? As you see, it's not like real difficult, okay? And the quality of the grind is just so much better. Ladies and gentlemen, as you can see, just from the moment we've done this, and I've had this on low speed, so you can see the longer time it takes to grind isn't very long at all. I'll give it just a moment for it to finish clearing, because in the front of the auger sometimes there'll be a little residual meat, and that's what you're seeing getting pushed out right now. There it is. We are finished. Wasn't that easy and quick? It only took minutes to do this, and that's 1.5 pounds of grind right there, folks, and this is a much higher quality grind than you're going to be able to get if you buy ground beef. That's because we ground a choice cut, and it gives me this very soft, subtle texture. Now, to make my steak, as we were talking about before, we're not going to put a bunch of filling in it. We don't need filling. We need a piece of meat that tastes like a steak, all right? Now, the rest of this, I'm going to take and turn into patties, and we're going to use that for other things. But for myself today, I want a big one here. I'm going to get a little more meat. Now, a lot of times this is done as an oblong piece, and I think that was to make it look more like maybe a steak. Who knows? But we can do that and just form it nice and pretty like so. Isn't that sharp looking? Okay, there we have it. We have our meat ready to go, and we don't want to go any further with it or work it or add anything other than the seasoning on the outside. Why? Well, think about it. If you were going to cook a ribeye steak, or let's say you're going to cook a strip steak, you have to figure that steak isn't going to be seasoned on the inside, and it's going to taste like what? It's going to taste like a fine piece of meat, a fine steak. So what we've done is we've taken a piece of sirloin and tenderized it and made it more digestible just through simple grinding. Why would I mess with that? I want it to be steak, and I want it to be as thick as it was when I started with it, which is about that right there. There we go. I have my steak ready to go, guys. The rest of this I'm going to freeze and turn it into other goodies. Now, to get started on the vegetables, this is simple enough. These mushrooms, I simply want to make that stem flush with my cap. I want to do it just like that. So I'm keeping the stem on these, but I want it flush. And that is the appearance after it is cut is very unique and nice when it's done that way. These grow in pairs, and there's a small one here and a big one here, so you just kind of got to break these apart, and sometimes getting in there to do that can be easier said than done. So what I'll do is just gently run my knife right down through there to break that paper, and I can break these apart then. So I'm going to take off this outer paper all the way, because the part I want is going to be underneath right there. Now, on preparing our shallot, well, you have to only remove the tip, all right? And then, as I mentioned before, I want a thin slice. Now, if you're going to do what I'm about to do, listen to me carefully. Number one, pinch the blade, okay, just like this. See how I have my first finger wrapped over the back of the blade here, and I'm pinching it. I got my fingers back on that handle, all right? And this keeps my blade from rolling in my hand like this, which if that happens is very dangerous and you can get cut. By pinching it, it will not roll, all right? Now, I want to establish a motion, and that's going to be an up and down motion like this. And if you're learning this, start slow, like this. And then work your way up. The speed will come in time. You have to work on safety. The other hand, the one I'm going to be holding vegetables with, I'm going to keep those fingers turned over. They call this a crab technique, okay? I like to call it holding the ball technique. See there, it looks like you're holding on a ball. Anyway, the fingertips are curled under, and by having them curled under, they don't get cut. By keeping the thumb behind them, it doesn't get cut. And the center part of the knuckle right here, the center joint, becomes the guide to the side of the knife, all right? So, right, there we have our shallot. Now our mushrooms, the same way, thin sliced. So it's not going to take a whole lot of mushroom. Now folks, as you can see, that's a lot of mushroom, and we've only sliced 2 mushrooms. That's all it's going to take. If you like a lot of mushroom, go ahead and chop up that 3rd one. It won't be a big deal. And the chives, I want to keep this really simple. When it comes to handling chives, keep them wrapped up, keep them uncut, and cut them only at the very moment you're going to use them, because they're going to release their oils instantly, and after that they will start drying and they become worthless in about 30 minutes. Okay? So do your chives at the moment you need them. I have almost everything ready here. Go ahead and get our wine opened up. And if you've never seen wine opened in quite this way, well, I guess you've missed out, haven't you? There we go. Wine is ready. There we go. Cork back in bottle, and that's ready to do its job. I have my other ingredients for the sauce back here. I need to go ahead and season my meat as my pan is heating. So I turn my pan on. I want my temperature on this at medium high. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to cook this exactly the same way I cook my strip steaks. I like to do simple pan fried strip steaks. And a strip steak, that's the big side of a T-bone, also known as a Kansas City strip or a New York strip. Strip steak, simple enough. When I do a strip steak, I salt just like so. My pepper the same way. I want a medium grind on my pepper, if you're curious. Now I have my meat ready to hit a hot skillet. How do I know if my pan is at the right temperature? It's simple. Put some water in there. See how the water is sizzling off. And it's sizzling off slowly. That tells you that the pan is not hot enough. If the pan was hot enough, water would skate around in there. It would beat up and just kind of roll around, and it wouldn't cook off real quick. And that's what we call Leidenfrost effect. Leidenfrost means that the temperature in that pan is hot enough to create a vapor barrier between the water droplet and the pan itself. And that's what we're looking for. Why? It gives a good sear. That's why you get a perfect sear when you have temperature as high as a pan that reaches Leidenfrost. Okay, so and Leidenfrost is the name of the scientist that discovered this effect and taught us about it. Now, this is how we apply it to cooking, and it is relevant. The other thing that you will notice
I do not put my oil in my pan. It's beginning to do that Leidenfrost thing. Do not preheat your oil. What it does is it breaks the oil down. It does not lubricate as well during cooking. All right, so we heat the pan dry. There it goes. That's what we're looking for right there, ladies and gentlemen. Do you see how that happens? That's an extremely hot pan. That's what we need. Okay, get that water out of there. Back on the heat. Now, once the pan's at the right temperature, we put our oil in it. It doesn't take just a whole lot, just enough to cover the bottom of the pan. There we go. Wasn't that easy? The meat hits it. Now, this is so important, folks, when your meat hits the pan. We're cooking this on a medium-high heat. Leave it alone. Let it cook. Don't touch it. Don't move it. And give it exactly 4 minutes. There we go. It's on a countdown. Flip it over at the end of 4 minutes. Cook it for another 4 minutes on the other side. And then take it off. Place it on the plate you're going to eat from. And then we prepare that sauce. There we go, folks. That timer has gone off. Looky there. Isn't that beautiful? We have that color on it. Now, once again, 4 minutes. There we go. It has been 4 minutes on each side. So I'm now going to take this off. And this is a beautiful medium in the middle, guys. Put him right onto the plate that I'm going to serve this on. Next, I'm just going to let this rest on the plate while I'm busy making sauce. Now, if you'll notice, I have some butter pats and some wine here. So we're going to take the wine, we're going to deglaze our pan first. And that right there was about 1/3 of a cup. Nice, huh? So first bring this to a boil, and once it comes up to a good vigorous boil, we're going to start working in our butter. All right, now 1 pat at a time, just start working that in. And what'll happen is that butter is going to emulsify with the wine. And now it's time to go ahead and put in our shallots and the mushrooms. Here's the shallot, there's our mushroom, and we're going to get those cooked up together. At this point, we just need to let this reduce and cook these vegetables. Oh, we're looking at delicious now, folks. Now, of course, today it started with our beef, and we used a fairly substantial beef steak there. Once I put the meat back together, you're looking at making steaks between 8 and 14 ounces. So consider your meat purchase around that. And remember, this is about using a fresh meat and grinding it fresh, because you can't keep a pink interior if you're going to use something that was pre-ground. Folks, on the other ingredients, as we see here, there are beautiful items. We have our mushrooms down here, and these are these are cremini, which is the youngest of the portobello clan, all right? So anyway, the creminis, I recommend just a small amount of these, and part of a shallot. Now here, this is a full shallot, which is actually 2 pieces when you break it apart. Your chives, you're going to want, on those chopped chives, about 2 or 3 teaspoons, and maybe some extra long pieces for decorating with. The salt and pepper, those are to taste, folks. It's just sprinkled on lightly over the meat before cooking. How much wine? You're going to use anywhere from 1/4 to 1/3 of a cup of wine in deglazing. And then, of course, your butter, which we don't have out here, but your butter is going to be about 2 to 2.5 tablespoons of butter whisked in by pats into that wine. The peanut oil, of course, just enough to keep things cooking properly. All right, so this is a steak that's not deep fried, but it's shallow fried, and then we use the fond on the bottom of the pan to make a beautiful sauce, as you've seen. So there it is, folks. Those are your quantities. Just keep things on the light side when it comes to the vegetables. You know, sometimes you can go overboard and use a little too much, and then it's, well, just a little too much. So this is a recipe that requires a light hand. Let's take a quick look at the finished product. Oh yeah. It has hit that point, folks. It's reduced down. Now, I need to decorate my Salisbury steak. Let's get on with that. First thing I'm going to do, rather than just pouring this down onto it, I'm going to take my vegetables. I'm going to set them off to one end. There we go. What I'm doing here is I'm just working on presentation. Remember, when it comes to a dish like this, we eat with our eyes first. I'll take the rest of my glaze, pour it over the meat, and let it just fall off to my plate. That is what I call a Salisbury steak. Don't you think? It's time for our final step, which is the garnish. I'm going to take these smaller chives and pull them so the points are all near the top, and I'm going to cut those off because that becomes something else. Now, chopped chives. Now let's take some of these and form us a nice decoration, an edible decoration across the top of the meat. That is my version of Salisbury steak. So good. And look, if you do fresh grind, you can do medium, all right? It's safe. But it has to be ground at the same time you're going to cook it, not some other time. It has to be fresh to be safe. Thank you, folks. I can't resist. I need another bite. I'm sorry. I so love steak. I love a grilled steak. I love a fried steak. Steak is delicious. And I want it to taste like steak, not like meatloaf in a gravy. Okay, that's not me. I don't do that. I do stuff like this. Exceptional and special and delicious. And folks, thank you very much for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this recipe. For my subscribers, thank you very much. I really appreciate your help. You subscribing gives me encouragement, and it helps push me forward, and it gives me drive. I do appreciate that. Also, to those people who write in, I appreciate you more than you know. The comments, the suggestions, and the requests all help me out here. They help me a lot. And if you'll look in the comments on my videos, you'll notice a lot of replies. Thank you very much for that. If you haven't subscribed, please do. Please also take a look at my Patreon page. There it is, patreon.com/Stuart Trotter. It's a funding source for people in the arts. It'll help me with my photography business as well as pushing forward this YouTube channel. Every bit of it goes into the business. Thank you very much for helping. And folks, thank you very much for watching. Please enjoy your Salisbury steak. I will certainly be enjoying mine. Bye-bye.